What I really do like about my practice area, which is this estate planning stuff, is that it allows me to be passionate professionally in what I'm passionate about personally, right? My family, my wife. Well, I get to help people think about that as well.
Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve.
Welcome to the Dream Big and Think Different podcast, where we inspire, impact, and empower.
Progress is impossible if you always do things the way you have always done things.
It's time to dream big. Here's your host, Dr. Sachin Maskey.
All right, again, we are here. Welcome to Dream Big and Think Different podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sachin Maskey, and we have here today one of the most expert in estate planning attorney, Andrew Howell, another dreamer, and I'm honored to have him in our show and appreciate your time. How are you, Andrew, today?
Doing fantastic. Excited to be here with you, Doc. I love talking about this stuff, and that's why my wife thinks I'm so incredibly boring. But no, it's the stuff that I like.
Sure. I met Andrew. We haven't met in person, but I spoke with Andrew a couple of years, 2020, I believe. We started talking, and I really think Andrew is very well known in his area, what he does, and he's been doing this for almost, I don't know how many decades, but long time back. And I'm honored to have him in our show, and hopefully we can learn something today from him. So let's start with his bio. I know it's going to be a little long bio, but I think it's important to know. So Andrew Howell is a co-founder of a Salt Lake City law firm called Howell, which is one of the fastest growing law firms in Utah, Salt Lake City. Mr. Howell has built a successful practice throughout the United States with respect to estate planning, asset protection, probate and estate administration, charitable giving, sophisticated business structuring and transaction, and tax planning. Mr. Howell is the most passionate about family legacy planning that he assists his client with, and he specifically focuses on ultra high net worth families and business owners. He is also a co-author of a book called Entrusted, Building a Legacy, which actually I have read the book. That very, very amazing book. Which features 7 core disciplines of successful wealth transfer from high net worth family going back 100 years ago, which we're going to talk about today. He's also the co-author of the follow-up book called Riveted, 44 Values That Change the World. Entrusted has been well received by estate planning community and has led to recent speaking engagement to attorneys on the future of the estate planning. He is routinely recognized as a Mountain State top lawyer, Utah Business Magazine named among Utah legal elite in 2011 through 2016. Mr. Howell is recommended as one of the top 100 lawyers in Utah by a national advocates. When not in office, Andrew enjoys vacationing in Montana with his wife and 3 beautiful children. He's also avid fly fisherman, hunter, skier, love to be outdoors with his family. Wow, that's a pretty awesome bio, and welcome again to our show, Andrew. And lucky to have you.
I wish you would have just read that last part. When I'm not working, what do I like to do? Because that's why we're all working, right? To do that last stuff.
Sure, definitely. Again, having I'm very excited and thrilled to talk about one of the complicated topic, and I'm happy to, I'm very happy to have you in my show. So let's start with our first question. I ask everyone, who is Andrew Howell? And why he's in this world.
Who is Andrew Howell? First thing I'd say is I'm a father. I've got a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 12-year-old who's going to be 13, 2 boys and a little girl. And I say this in jest, only slightly true, that my boys are for sale and my daughter's not. And my boys' price they're going down by the day. But I love my kids to death. It was a life-changing event for me. I'm sure everybody who has kids can agree to this,
Sure.
that you start, you have that new little one on this planet, and you start living your life for somebody else. And that has driven a lot of my passion in terms of the books that we've written, the practice that I've formed and the firm that we've created. Um, so I'd say first and foremost, I'm a father. I also am a husband. I love my wife. We've been married for 20 years.
Wow.
She deserves a medal of honor putting up with me for that long. But yeah, I don't know how I would be able to produce without her. And she really is my anchor in many, many ways. Um, and then I devote a lot of my life to my profession. And so as horrible as it is to say, I do consider myself an attorney. Now, I don't really consider myself a true attorney because, when I help people, I'm hoping to help them sleep better at night, right? Planning their estate, protecting their assets, right? I'm not taking them to court, suing them, making their life worse. I'd never wanted to practice that kind of law. So I love attorney jokes. If anybody has a good one, feel free to let them fly. I feel like they're well earned, just not by me. But what I really do like about my practice area, which is this estate planning stuff, is that it allows me to be passionate professionally in what I'm passionate about personally, right?
Hmm.
My family, my wife. Well, I get to help people think about that as well. I mean, very, very few people think about estate planning at all. Only 30% of the population ever does it. And the vast majority of people that do it meet with some bloodsucker like me that sit down and they tell you what you should do
Hmm.
rather than kind of listening to who you are and who your family is and what you're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't put any purpose really into that overall planning, and that's where the books come in, and that's where I'm really passionate about, and some of the developments that we've had with that I don't even think Sachin I made you aware of yet, but some really cool things that are going to happen this year with that. But so I definitely, because I devote so much time in my life to my profession, consider
Sure.
myself an attorney also.
Thank you for your, your purpose in life and whatever you do, and whatever how many people you're helping. And there's really I really appreciate it. And in the full disclaimer, I want to let everyone know is he's my attorney too, who has helped me plan my estate planning, and hopefully as I grow, and he'll be my till I die, I guess.
I hope so until as long as I don't do something wrong, I guess. I'd love to be.
No, amazing. I mean, I just want to let people know that actually I have a hand. Look at this. The binder. It's pretty thick and pretty well done. And I haven't actually read it till like I've read a few things, but it's pretty extensive there. And it's an important topic to discuss. That's why I want to have him from him and talk about this issue.
Well, size does matter when it comes to your estate planning binder, right? So,
But thank you for helping me out. And let's talk about since the podcast name is I call it Dream Big and Think Different, and I wanted to know when when you're a kid, right? When you're small, what was your childhood dream?
I never wanted to be fireman, policeman, or whatever. I actually wanted to be a veterinarian, to be honest.
Okay.
I love animals. We have 4 dogs. I don't think you can tell my HOA that because we'll get in trouble, but we've got 4 dogs, and I just have always loved animals. And one of my dad's best friends was a very well-known veterinarian here in Salt Lake, and I went down and one summer worked at the clinic, and I learned that being a veterinarian is not petting puppies, right? It has a lot
Hmm.
more involved in that, and so that was a quick learning experience to say, no, I can't be a part of the dirty part of that job, which somebody's got to do it. But man, I couldn't. I would just wrench at my heart. So,
Sure.
having this heart, I decided to go to law school, right? I'm joking, right? Most lawyers don't have a heart, as they say, but
Yeah.
the law is a family business. My grandfather was an estate planning lawyer, Harvard law grad. He actually, people still call him in the estate planning world the dean of estate planning, even though he's been gone for
Wow.
18 years now. But he was a huge impact in my life. My
Hmm.
dad was a tax attorney. My uncle, 2 of my uncles are attorneys. My aunt was a judge. So it was kind of in the family. And I actually knew
Hmm.
I wanted to go to law school. I knew I didn't want to, again, be in court and Perry Mason and fighting with everybody. I knew I wanted to do estate planning because of kind of the lead of my grandpa. But from a pretty early age, I'd say maybe like 12, 13 years old, I knew I wanted to go to law school.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. So yeah, I mean, in my situation, I would compare it to like my family. I'm the first. Like my brother's a doctor and I'm a doctor, so everyone is a businessman. and kind of I don't real. Now I kind to do my own thing now. Going to this real estate and other things that I think comes from the blood. Same
Sure.
like you, what you've been doing.
Keep doing
So
this.
so amazing. So I appreciate that. 11 years old and 12 years. My son is 11 now, and I can imagine like your brain that time, how you think.
Well, he was always really good about it. He worked here in Salt Lake. When he graduated from Harvard, he went to California, and then he came back to Salt Lake because he didn't like the lifestyle. And he
Hmm.
would let me work down at his firm. He made me. I mean, I was 11, 12 years old, being a gopher down at his firm, and he would always bring me into meetings and with clients just to kind of see how he
Wow.
did things. And this is why I liked what I do, because I could see that you could solve people's problems rather than creating them. I mean, I think one
Right.
of your jobs in life, and I truly mean this, is to keep lawyers out of your life because they only complicate things, right? And so I didn't want to
Sure.
be that guy. And this one day, my grandpa, he brought in a client. He's a very wealthy man. He's passed since here in Utah, but he was the owner of Sinclair Oil, the Grand America Hotel, and Little America Hotels, and some hotels in California, and one of Utah's billionaires. And so he came in for a meeting with my grandpa, and he said, "Hey, do
Hmm.
you mind if my grandson comes in?" And this gentleman's name is Earl Holding, and Earl said, "No, I don't mind at all. Come on in." So I sat there and I heard my grandpa and Earl talk about this new piece of property that he had purchased, which was like a mile or a mile and a half of ocean front in Santa Barbara, California.
Hmm.
Now, when a client comes to me and says, "Hey, Andrew, we bought a new asset," it's like a rental property or a condo in Florida. This was a mile and a half of oceanfront in Santa Barbara, California. But my grandpa didn't just immediately go and say, "Hey, how much is it worth?" and all of these various things. He said, "First, Earl, what do you plan on doing this within your family, or how does this fit into your business planning?" It was a much deeper dive into this major purchase that was made and how was it going to impact the family and all of these kind of things. And I thought, that's pretty cool. I'm wanting to know how much the property is worth, and I don't think they even got to that until the end of the meeting.
Hmm.
So that's sort of where I started formulating how, in my mind, estate planning was done. And then when I got out of law school, I didn't want to work with my grandpa. I didn't like the nepotism and all that kind of look. I wanted to do it on my own. So I
Hmm.
joined a large law firm here in Salt Lake. They've since been purchased by the largest law firm in the world called Denton's.
Hmm.
But I was there for 7 years working under a fabulous estate planning lawyer who I'm still very, very good friends with as a mentor. I think mentors are very, very important.
Sure.
But one of the things that I found out when coming into that structure of that kind of that firm mentality is that estate planning was very much a trust mill, we call it, right? You meet with a client, you get their financial data, you find out how much their net worth is, and then you tell them what kind of will trust they need to have. And I thought that it was bass backwards, right? I'd been taught that you first find out what was the impact and the intention in the estate planning, and now all of a sudden you're telling a client what they need to do with their own planning. So that's where a little bit of that disconnect came into play. And
Hmm.
my partner, David York, and I, who started York Howell now almost 10 years ago, that's where we started writing the books and thinking, our brethren out there, our other estate planning lawyer colleagues are just doing this the wrong way. And our clients are becoming more and more demanding to have this kind of a conversation. They don't want trust fund babies, right? They
Hmm.
don't want, we call them in the book trustafarians, the kids that have so much money that they can sit on the couch and eat bonbons. And how do you actually do that, right? This impact and this wealth that you're going to be transferring to them, how can you make sure that it doesn't blow themselves up, right? We use dynamite as the analogy in our book, that dynamite's not good or bad, but it can be used for good or bad. But the issue with financial wealth and dynamite is there is going to be an impact. It's just how big of an impact is it going to make, and do you put any thought into the impact, and so forth. So again, that's kind of far too much information than you wanted to know, but that's sort of where I think I feel I'm a little bit different in what I do in terms of estate planning, or I'd say a lot different than a lot of my colleagues. Is I
Hmm.
really like to understand the client, understand their goals and objectives, their family dynamics, and then you architect what kind of a plan they might have.
Sure, sure. Yeah, definitely. So we're gonna go more about the estate planning actually now, since we have the expert. So let's talk about it. Like, what is estate planning? The basic thing. And I have again the whole thing. I was reviewing myself today and trying to understand more, and maybe you can start with what is estate planning. What are the components of the estate planning, the basic thing, and how this got started. And only I was thinking only 30% people are doing this, and I was like, what is the reason? Kind of those things.
Well, it's not fun. I mean, right? You have this conversation with a blood-sucking lawyer like me about death and taxes. I mean, there's so many other things I'd rather do during the day, and you're running businesses and raising families, and stuff gets in the way. What
That's
most people
true.
don't realize though is that when you haven't done your own estate planning, so this other 70% of the population who just says I'm not going to do it, or I don't have time to do it, or whatever, what you don't realize is that it's already been done for you. In every state in the nation, I don't care if we're talking about Utah, Illinois, California, New York, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. Every state has a law that says how your estate is going to pass if you fail to plan otherwise.
Sure.
And depending upon your family circumstances, that could be very different than what you had intended.
Mm-hmm.
Blended families, which are by far the norm these days, second marriages, whatever, kids from prior relationships, that all causes major problems when it comes to your estate planning in terms of what the probate code thinks you want to do versus what you might actually want to do. So
Mm-hmm.
it amazes me that more people don't do it, but I think that really is the reason why. But
Okay.
going back to kind of the fundamental question of what this stuff is, if you and I were to meet in an elevator, Doc, and this has never happened to me in 20 years, but you asked me what I did, and you're always supposed to have this elevator pitch, right?
Yeah.
My elevator pitch would be that I'm an estate lawyer. Horrible elevator pitch, right? Who would ever do that? But when people hear that, oftentimes they'll think of wills and trusts and power of attorney documents and medical directives. And that's certainly part of estate planning, don't get me wrong. But it's sort of the end part. I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean that you should do it at the end, but it's dealing with the end of your life, right? When you pass away, how do you want to make sure that your estate is passing on in the most tax efficient manner, in the most beneficial manner to your family, so your kids, again, aren't becoming trustafarians, right? All of those things come into play. But it's missing this whole other aspect of estate planning for me. What are you doing with your estate while you're still alive?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that estate that you are working so hard, right? The vast majority of your time to build, how is that functioning in the most tax efficient manner? And that'll bring in tax planning. I certainly consider myself a tax attorney. That brings in business structuring. It brings in charitable giving. And then how do we make sure that this estate you're working hard to create is protected from the rest of the world, right? This litigious society that we live in, everybody wanted to take your assets and your hard work. And that's this concept of asset protection. And there's many different ways to do asset protection planning, but I think those three categories of kind of business structuring, tax planning, asset
Mm-hmm.
protection planning, combined with the estate planning, wills and trusts, and providing for the family and guardianship for minor children, that all has to be done, I think, in conjunction with each other, because they definitely interrelate.
Sure. So I guess the basic, what I learned from estate planning, I guess one of the most important document, what I believe, and was a lengthy doc, more than 100 pages, I think, is a living trust. I think, and if you can give us some breakdown of living trust, what are the most important thing we should discuss with the, like yourself, like how to do those things, because it's kind of complicated when I go through all these documents, and because there's so many things, you if you can go over the basic, things of a high level of a living trust.
Yeah, it is complicated. I think that's definitely a fair assessment of it. And that's why, anybody listening on the podcast should work with an attorney that specializes in estate planning. It's hard, I think, in today's world to be a generalist, right? Hey, I'll do your divorce. I'll also draft your last will and testament. Two very different areas of the law. So I think that's definitely a fair assessment. But yeah, let me go back and answer your question.
Mhm.
Most people, I think, because of watching TV or in a movie, understand, or at least sort of have heard of, a last will and testament, right? Your
Mhm.
will, which says, and that's the historic document that would say, when I die, I want all of my assets to go this way. Okay.
Mhm.
Again, this is even a document that people will still do, simply just have a will. They don't have anything else like a trust. And that's totally fine. Again, that's more than most. That's more than 70% of the population is done. At least you're taking the control upon yourself to say how I want my estate to pass, rather than relying on that law, the probate code, to dictate. The problem, though, with a last will and testament, there's a number of problems with it, is you own the assets when you pass away. So this is where the revocable living trust comes in. Now, a trust is an interesting thing. It's kind of a complicated thing because there's many different types of trusts that are out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
From in the real estate world, you have real estate income trusts, right? REITs, they call them, or in the higher asset protection planning world, you have, of course, offshore asset protection trusts. And now we have domestic asset protection trusts that we use. I don't care what kind of trust you're talking about. When you boil a trust down to really what it is, it's an agreement. Okay, that's it. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a corporation. It's not a limited liability company. It's not an entity. It's an agreement. And there's three critical players that are involved in any trust agreement. The first person involved in a trust is who we call the grantor of the trust, or the settlor of the trust. That's the person or people who create the trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you create a trust really easily. You do so by taking assets and giving those assets to the second person involved in a trust here,
Mm-hmm.
who's called the trustee. And the trustee of the trust is in control of the trust and its assets and has the obligation to manage the trust assets and protect them, but use those assets in the trust for the benefit of the third player here, who we call the beneficiary of the trust, right? And trusts have been around for a long time. They can trace back almost 800 years through Old English common law, in fact, back to the Crusades. And what you would have back then is this wealthy landowner. He owns tons and tons of property. And at his death, all of this property is going to pass to his eldest son, right? It's the way that it used to be done back then. It's called the right of primogeniture. I'm the eldest son in my family. I wish it was still done that way. Fortunately, it's not, right? But this wealthy landowner is thinking to himself, look, if my 10-year-old son were to inherit this big piece of land that I own, he can't manage it and farm it and make it productive. He's 10 years old. And at that young age, he's so impressionable, somebody's going to come and swindle the property out from under him. So what the landowner would do instead is he'd go to his neighbor, who's another wealthy landowner,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd say, hey, neighbor, if something happens to me, I want you to come in and be in charge of all of my property as the trustee, right? You control it, you manage it, you farm it, make it productive.
Mm-hmm.
But sometime in the future, when my son is responsible enough to manage it himself, I want you to take this property and turn it back over to him. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the birth of the modern trust. Now, granted, some of these more complex trusts, like a real estate income trust, can have very complicated agreements going on between grantors, trustees, and beneficiaries.
Sure.
But the revocable living trust, first of all, the revocable in that name means that you have a lot of flexibility to change this trust. You can add things to the trust. You can take things from the trust. You can amend any of its provisions. You could terminate or revoke it, right? That's why it's called a revocable trust if you don't want it any longer. And that's an important thing because flexibility in your estate planning is wise to the greatest degree that you can accomplish it. Planning changes, right? Your family circumstances changes. I promise you tax laws are going to change. And the revocable nature of the trust allows you to make changes to it. We call it a living trust because it's created now while you are alive and it lives beside you as your alter ego. Like in my revocable living trust, I am the grantor of that trust. I created it. I will always be known as the one that created it. J.D. Rockefeller is still known as the grantor of the Rockefeller Trust. He's long since gone. I am also the trustee of the trust. I'm in control. I don't want to lose control. I mean, I'm a huge control freak. It's a big thing in my life. But I want to control the assets for as long as I possibly can. But in the trust agreement, I can spell out who I want to be in control of the trust rather than hoping the court chooses the right person for me. And I'm not trying to badmouth courts. I just always think that they do the best that they can, I think. But I think that most of my clients have a better opinion of who should make decisions on their behalf than the court does. So I get to choose who makes those decisions as trustee. And then if I and my wife are no longer on this earth and therefore we can't benefit, because as long as we're breathing, we are beneficiaries of that trust. We play all three roles, but we can spell out who the contingent beneficiaries are going to be. Our three kids. Now, how they benefit is something that we can talk about if you want. But we now have this trust that is created by me, controlled by me, and benefited by me. And instead of me owning my assets, the trust owns the assets. And now if something happens to me, my wife doesn't have to hire some blood-sucking lawyer like me. and have him, spend a bunch of money in preparing legal documents that get filed with the court so that she can be appointed as the executor over my estate and now go to get access to all of those assets that were in my name. No, they were in the trust's name.
So just want
So avoiding probate is that first goal.
I think I want to hold that thought, because it's very expensive to do all this, because right now you're spending a couple of grands, but when you do this, when you die, like doing all the estate planning, whatever we call after we die, it's like, I don't know how much it costs, but it's very expensive, I heard.
It's extremely expensive, and it actually depends upon the jurisdiction that you're in. Some probates are less extensive and less complicated. Like, just as an example, the Commonwealth of Virginia. Their process is pretty straightforward. Doesn't mean that you don't want to avoid it. The most straightforward probate that I have ever seen cost about $6,000 in legal fees. Now, if you're on the coast, if you're in New York or if you're in California, you should do what you can to avoid probate. California's actually passed a law that says how much they can charge an estate for taking legal fee wise, taking them through probate. It's crazy amounts. So avoiding probate is a big deal. Yeah, no question.
And it's time
The other thing
consuming
about
too.
it's time consuming and it's open to the public, right? Remember, probate happens in court. It's you going down to court, being appointed as the executor. You file all these documents with the court. And I could go down to the courthouse and get copies of anybody's probated documents. And there's a lot of personal information in there. First of all, who you are, the fact that you died, who the beneficiaries of your estate are, how they benefit, where you lived. I like all of those things being private. And the trust agreement here is a private agreement that nobody has a right to see unless you allow them to see it. So it also creates a whole lot of privacy within the handling of your affairs when you pass.
You're listening to the Dream Big and Think Different podcast with Dr. Sachin Maskey. Be sure to stop by SachinMaskeyMD.com to download a free copy of Dr. Maskey's book.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I have fortunately done with you, and I guess it's a lot of reason, and we can dig more about it. But one question I'm trying to figure out is who should do the estate planning, and when they should do it. Meaning, is there anybody in this country should do this, or there's any income level that they needs to have, net worth level, and when exactly they should do this?
It's a tough question, and I get asked it a lot because for me, everybody ought to do this.
Sure.
And we even encourage clients with adult children to have their adult children do it. As soon as they're 18 years old, they are legal adults, and you no longer have the ability to make your child's healthcare decisions. They're off to college. They, get the flu and they're having to go to the hospital. Who's talking on their behalf? They're legal adults. We do young adult plans where they have a simple will that says, yeah, we don't have any assets. We're 18 years old. But in the event we do have any assets, because sometimes they do, right? A lot of times with family planning, in the estate planning world, you'll create family partnerships and you can give interest in that family partnership onto your children. And you can even pass income on to kids and doing some things from a tax perspective. So they might actually own things. So you have a last will and testament that says, God forbid if something were to happen to them, that the assets come back to the family. But also, and again, more importantly, these power of attorney documents that give, the parent, assuming the child wants that, the parent the still right to make their healthcare decisions and their financial decisions if they're laid up in a coma. So to me, everybody ought to do this. Now, the extent, the level of estate planning that a person needs, that definitely will vary. And obviously, some of the stuff that we've done for you wouldn't necessarily be stuff that we would do for other people.
Mhm.
But I think everybody ought to consider it. And the other thing about it is, there are self-help places out there.
Mhm.
I am not one of these lawyers that's going to talk badly about things like LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer. There is a place for those things. And
Right.
again, you can go on there. You can do a last will and testament. I think you can even do a revocable living trust. Now, of course, I think people outgrow that, and they need a little bit or a lot more sophistication in terms of what their estate planning is. But a person that doesn't have any assets, maybe no children, but I don't know. They might not worry a whole lot about this. That could definitely be a great avenue for them to look at without having to pay somebody like me to come in and do some extensive estate planning. Now, we represent everybody in our practice. Again, our adult children from clients, but husband and wife, 2.5 kids, just getting out of college and starting their life, all the way to the billionaire level. So it just depends on the tools that you're using for each of those clients and the goals they're trying to accomplish.
Sure. So what happens, let's say, for myself or somebody has net worth, let's say more than 10 million. That's what we call wealthy in this country, right? So I guess what happens if you don't do estate planning, like in terms of.
Well, couple things happen. First of all, another benefit of the trust is, like, if you were to read my trust, you would see that if something happened to my wife and myself, my kids are the beneficiary of my trust. But I don't leave anything outright to my kids ever.
Mhm.
It stays in a trust for their entire lifetime, and that does a couple very important things. It protects it from potential bad actors that come into their life. It also keeps it from being included in their estate for estate tax purposes, which we can touch on. In fact, I'll touch on it probably now as we talk about this
Sure.
$10 million hypothetical estate. But the $10 million estate level, of course, is a very, very high level, high net worth. I mean, most people, quite honestly, are in debt, let alone having positive net worths in excess of $10 million. But from a tax perspective, and really what we're talking about here is taxes in the estate planning world, which is the estate tax. Now, I want to differentiate this. There's the federal estate tax, and then some states have death taxes at the state level. Okay. So the federal estate tax is this tax that when you die at the federal level, the government, the IRS, is going to expect an additional 40% tax on your assets.
Mm.
Now, you don't hear about this more often because, like I said before, most people don't have that level of net worth where this kicks in. Under current law, in fact, it just went up on January 1st, every U.S. citizen has 12.92 million of credit against this estate tax. So as a married couple, that's $25,840,000 that could pass on, let's say, to your children entirely estate tax free. And then only every dollar over and above that would be subject to an estate tax. So in your hypothetical $10 million estate, there probably isn't anything to worry about, at least right now, in regards to the federal estate tax. Keep in mind, taxes are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal opinion, based upon the way things are going, is the government is not going to need less money in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I see taxes increasing. And the reason that we have this really high exemption amount, the amount that you can pass without it being subject to tax, is because we're still operating under the Trump tax reform. The Trump tax reform, though, unless it's changed earlier by Congress, is set to expire in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
So now less than 3 years away. And what that will mean is we will go back to the Obama days in the estate tax law of about 6 million that you could pass estate tax free, 12 million as a married couple with a 35% tax on anything over and above that. So a significant amount less that you can give tax free. So we need to keep our eye on that, even in a $10 million estate, because it's pushing the envelope a little bit there. Now, I mentioned some states have death taxes, like just as an example, Washington State. They allow each U.S. citizen to pass at their death $2.19 million, so just under $2 million, estate tax free. And then every dollar above that is subject to a 10% to 20% tax, and it floats based upon how much your estate is actually worth. So at a $10 million estate, somebody like that would have a death tax issue at the state level. So keep that in mind. But the biggest problem that I see with a $10 million client not doing any estate planning, let's say that they have 2 children. Well, at their death, what every probate code says in the entire United States, including Louisiana, because they have some backwards laws, but even Louisiana says this: at your passing, if you don't plan otherwise, let's say your children are under the age of 18, what you leave them will go into a custodial account managed by a court-appointed custodian. Going back to what I said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
Do you want the court deciding or do you want you deciding? But the court decides this custodian that's going to watch it for their benefit until they're 18 years old. And then at 18 years old, they get it all. In a $10 million estate with 2 kids, that means an 18-year-old with $5 million in the bank. I don't know what you were like when you were 18. I'm betting pretty responsible. I know what I was like when I was 18.
Not really.
I think I would have made a lot of mistakes if I had $5 million in the bank, because I made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes money makes those mistakes even bigger.
Right.
So, again, that's a big problem in my mind. And then the other problem is, even if you had the most responsible 18-year-old in the entire world, right? Warren Buffett was your child. I would still say don't give it to Warren when he's 18. I would say keep it in trust for his entire lifetime. Why? Because if you leave it to him, it becomes part of their estate for estate tax purposes. The last thing Warren Buffett needs is more money in his estate. Put it in a trust for his benefit. He can still benefit from it, but it's not part of his estate for estate taxes. Warren passes away, it goes on to his children estate tax free. But the other benefit of it, it stays in a trust that is only there for Warren Buffett's benefit, nobody else. Not Mrs. Buffett, if they were to get a divorce, I forget her name, not any kind of creditor that might come after and try to sue Warren Buffett. The assets are in a trust for his benefit. They're completely protected from creditors. So it's a much more dynamic way of doing some significant planning for a family like that, that's going to leave $5 million to a child. Right now, that child has a trust for their benefit: health, education, maintenance, support, in line with any of the family values and purposes like we talked about in the books. But the assets are in a trust for their benefit. It's not part of their estate and can never be taken from them by a bad actor. So that's, in my mind, the biggest benefit of the trust, as opposed to, say, just a simple will.
No, that's definitely something really important thing to know about. A lot of people, I don't think they're aware of this death tax.
Right.
So you mentioned about lifetime trust a few minutes ago. Can you explain that to me? Actually, wanted to know more about like how that works, because in my planning too, I was wondering what exactly is lifetime trust.
So you'll see in that gray Naugahyde binder,
Yeah.
in the trust document, there's a whole section that talks about a descendants separate trust. Okay. So like in my case, I've had my mom do her planning this way for me. My mom, who I love to death, still in very, very good health, and I don't want her going anywhere. But because of my grandpa's success, she's a pretty wealthy woman right now. And if something happened to her, I'm one of two children, me and my sister. And something happens to my mom, it's going, whatever she leaves me, and hopefully it's nothing. She spends it all and has a great time doing it. I do okay on my own. I don't need her money. But if something has come to me, it's coming to me in a lifetime trust.
Okay.
Now, this is also because I've done her legal work and she gets free legal work. But when it comes to me in this trust, it's not mine. It's in a trust for my benefit, and it can be used for health, education, maintenance, and support. And it stays in that trust for my entire lifetime. And then when I die, if there's anything left in that trust, it'll go to my children, her grandchildren, also in lifetime trust that exists for their entire lifetime. And the reasons for that are a couple-fold. Number one, I hope I have an estate tax problem. And it's not the only thing that I'm striving for in life, but if my wife and I have a $20 million, $30 million, $40 million estate, if I hit the Powerball and I'm worth $500 million, the last thing I need is for my mom to leave me half of her estate, because now my net worth increases. My estate value grows up. And when I die, those assets she left me could be subject to an additional estate tax. By leaving it in the trust for my benefit, again, I still get to enjoy them. I'm not completely altruistic here. They're there for my benefit, but they're not part of my estate. They were not mine. When I die, I don't have to worry about that portion in my mom's trust that she left me having to deal with in my planning. I don't have to plan around that on the estate tax, and that will go estate tax free to my children.
Sure.
So it solves that issue for me. But what it also does is, I am a blood-sucking vampire lawyer. And I talk to clients on a daily basis. And every time I talk to a client, I subject myself to liability risk. And if I were to be sued at some point, the assets that my mom leave me in that trust are never available to a creditor. Sorry, doc. You say I committed malpractice. You can't get after those assets. They weren't mine. They were in a trust for my benefit. My wife gets tired of all of my bad jokes and runs off to the Bahamas with the pool boy. She doesn't get those assets. They came from my mom being, if we were to go through a divorce. They're extremely protected from creditors. Now, what's the downside? Candidly, I don't think there is a downside in doing it this way. But sometimes when I explain this to clients, they'll push back on this word lifetime. Andrew, are you telling us for this? And, the rest of your life, your mom has set it up that you have this trust and you're going to have to go to some trustee that she chose and ask for money out of that trust. Now, some of my clients are ecstatic when they hear they can do that and they can make their child have to go to somebody else to ask for money for the rest of their life, right? Kind of depends upon the responsibility of your child. Luckily, my mom has this mistaken belief that I know how to run a trust. So at her death, she leaves me a trust with half of her estate in it. I can use it for my benefit. My sister gets a trust with half of her estate in it, and we get to be our own trustees. We're in control of that trust that she left us. So I get to decide how the assets in that trust are managed, used, invested. If I want to pull something out of that trust and give it to the beneficiary, well, that's me. So I'm writing myself a check. So it's a way to get some incredible protection, but really there isn't any downside in control. So like in the case of your child saying, hey, Caleb, when would be a good time for them to be responsible enough to be in control of what I have left them? Maybe it's an age, maybe it's a benchmark, a milestone, something that they need to meet in their life, and then they could control what you have left them.
Sure. So the lifetime trust, the trust we have set up for myself, like a living trust, that will turn automatically to the lifetime trust, or we have to do something to do it?
Well, I mean, of course, when it'll trigger at the time of your passing, and then these trusts will need to be created in terms of creating the bank accounts and the brokerage accounts and the other kind of things that are going to accept the assets that come from you guys. But all of that, the spelling out of how that trust gets created, that's all in the trust document that you have. Basically, we take that trust document and use that to create the new accounts.
Okay. Because kind of curious too, also, like, because I never done this before and I haven't died yet. So I need to know, like, for example, let's say something happens to me or my wife or whatever. Let's say both of us passed away, and who goes on, because this is not a public information, and you are the only one who knows about knowing this. And my question is, like, how this is gonna work, because I wasn't sure, like, this is something somebody will get notified immediately or something like that. It's kind of curious.
So I always tell people to take that, wonderful binder that you have and put it somewhere safe, but also accessible.
Okay.
Now you don't need to show everybody those documents. I mean, they're private, and
Of course.
I don't discourage you from doing
I have
that.
something the size, by the way.
But you definitely want to tell your family, say, hey, look, I've done my estate planning.
Okay.
If something, God forbid, were to happen to us, then you can find it. It's in our safe in our home office, or it's sitting on top of my desk, whatever it might be. Don't put it in a safety deposit box. I mean, first of all, you can see the size of the safety deposit box you'd have to get and how expensive it would be. But also the document that allows us to get into your safety deposit box is now in the safety deposit box. So keep it in a family office, somewhere else you keep important papers. And my name's all over that thing, as you know, right?
Yes.
And somebody sees your documents, they call me.
Okay.
And say, hey, something happened, and there's also networks, and we're going to hear about stuff. But I always tell clients to make a list. If you do nothing less for your family, make a list of the advisors that you work with, from your attorney to your accountant to your financial advisors to insurance agents to property and casualty agents, right? Everybody that would need to be contacted. I mean, your spouse, a lot of times you'll have a different dynamic within marriages where one spouse is more active in kind of the, let's say, financial life, and one is less active in that. I don't think your spouse or whatever needs to know all of this stuff like I do. I mean, that'd be crazy. What they need to know is who to call.
Of course.
And they don't have to work with me, right? They call me and they say, hey, look, Andrew, something's happened to the wonderful doctor here. What do we do? I say, well, look, I'm happy to help you. Or if you want to work with another attorney, what you do is you take that binder down to that attorney's office, and then they can call me and I'm happy to walk them through it. I mean, everything that like I've done for you in that binder, you could take to any other lawyer to work with if you wanted to.
Sure.
Or if she wanted to.
So thank you. Good to know that, because I wasn't sure what to do, and now I know, and I've talked to my wife.
Make a list. Just at the very list, everybody make a list of who's on your Rolodex in terms of who you rely on.
Sure.
And hopefully I'm at the bottom of that list. But,
we'll be top of the list. But anyway, so I just want to continue the conversation of estate planning. I know we have a little bit time here, but I want to talk about this Rockefeller's method. I think we already briefly talked about it. If you can give us some lifetime trust, I think it works with that with life insurance. So whole life policy, which I think Patrick is the one Paradigm Life. His my life whole life policy is with him. So how do we work that Rockefeller method? And I really wanted to know from you that how we can create this.
Yeah, Patrick's a good man. He's a client of mine as well, and think highly of him. And the Rockefeller method. And there's another book out there called "What Would the Rockefellers Do," written by a good friend of mine, Garrett Gunderson.
Garrett.
And in fact, yeah, Garrett actually quotes our book Entrusted in his book a couple of times. And but it's funny, the Rockefeller method, honestly, and we tell this story in our book, it's not really the Rockefeller method. It's the Rothschild method. Okay. So the idea behind the Rothschild family, which is not even arguably, they are by far the wealthiest family in the entire world. I saw their estimated net worth the other day, and I'm not going to even repeat it because they're probably listening to this call right now. But anyway, they're just have done this amazing job of creating a family dynasty. Look, I want to make sure everybody on this podcast, I'm not endorsing the Rothschilds by any stretch of the imagination. There's some evilness that has gone on in that family too. But they have done this amazing job of building financial wealth. And how they did it was to look at the family like a business. And it seems callous, but Commodore Rothschild was born on the streets of Amsterdam, and the way that he gained his wealth was by trading, bartering. You had a horse, I had a cart, he'd put us together and he'd make some money on that deal. Well, that led him into creating by far the biggest financial and banking conglomerate that underlies almost every banking system in the entire world to this day. But what happened is as he was having children, of course, he's raising his kids and they're being raised with the most privileged way possible, the best schooling, all that kind of stuff. He's putting a big investment in them. He started thinking, look, these are assets to me, our family business. I'm putting a lot of investment in these assets. And so what he would do is he would send them out as they became of age to various locales within Europe, sort of centers and hubs within Europe, and set them up to open their own banking in these hubs. And that's what it all got connected. But what he was doing was practicing kind of what we like to call in our book, the flint and the kindling. What you're doing is you're providing to your next generation the flint and the kindling to build their own roaring fire. You're not passing to them some burning log and hoping they don't burn themselves. You're allowing them to build their own fire. And that's what Commodore Rothschild really did try to foster within his family. But as part of that, he also recognized the fact that these people, these investments that he's made, have been a big financial investment. And if he were to say lose one of them, it would cause a major problem in terms of a financial loss in what he was intending for his family business. So that's where this concept of life insurance came into play. What we're going to do is get life insurance on every member of the family. And now if we have that loss in the family, at least we have some financial cash value or cash benefit coming back to us to help replenish us for that financial loss. Now, of course, the Rothschild method is much more sophisticated than that. But that's the idea, as I understand it, the Rockefeller method being, look, buy life insurance on your children. And that is a couple of things. I'm not a life insurance agent. I'm not getting paid to say this, but kids are usually far more insurable than adults are. And we get less insurable the older we get. So by getting life insurance on your children, you are ensuring insurability. Right? They have some medical issue. In fact, this happened in my scenario. I had my two oldest, my boys, I had life insurance on them. I waited. I didn't get it on my daughter. And about 18 months, when she was about 18 months old, she had her first seizure. And nobody's going to, give a life insurance policy until she's like 2 years free of that. Now, luckily she has been, so we've gotten insurance on her. But again, you can always get it, and you can also get it at a lower rate, right? Sure. Insurance on you is going to be less than somebody 30 years younger than you, right? So you can also lock in that lower premium. The other thing that you can do, like with our life insurance policies that we have on our children, is we're building up cash value in that. And I can help them in their life with that cash value. Maybe, assuming my kids are really responsible, I give them their life insurance policy as a wedding present. And they take that cash value and they use it to buy their first home. Now, of course, there's other ways that I would structure that, but just as an example, that's now me passing on that flint and kindling, while during that entire time of them being alive, I also had that insured interest protected with that death benefit. So there's a lot of thoughts to that. Now, the Rockefeller method has also meant a whole lot more when it comes to legacy planning. Also, this idea of passing on not just the financial wealth, but who a family is, their core values. Garrett talks about it as a family constitution in his book. We call it the 5 core values, or the 7 principles that entrusted families use. But it's getting purposeful about who you are as a family, and more put more of that into your planning.
Sure. So in order to for us to, I guess, to actually do this, as for me, for example, so I have the life insurance, I have the little trust, right? So what other steps I should be doing in order to set up those Rockefeller method, or whatever you call a family banking? What would be your suggestion?
Well, like we've, well, I don't want to give away too much in terms of your planning. Right? You got to keep confidentiality here, but we've done more,
Right.
right? And about than just the trusts, and with things like, I'll use me as an example. If you were to look at my planning, I don't just have wills and trusts. Now, of course, I get free legal work as well, so I have a whole lot of stuff that I probably don't need. But I do have ultimately a family holding company, an LLC created in Wyoming. There's a number of states that you can choose that provide some great protection, but I have a family holding company, and then underneath that is where I have basically all of my assets, from real estate to investments that are after tax, to cash holdings, to life insurance. It's all held underneath in some way of this family holding company. And what that does is that's really where our family banking comes into play. Right, my kids, something happens, again, like I said, don't get anything. They get a trust for their benefit, and what their trusts are ultimately going to own is a third of that family partnership, right? And that family partnership still holds all of the assets together, and that prevents one of the erosive effects of wealth transfer, which is the division of the estate. Right? Just as an example, let's say you take a $100 million estate, and this couple has 4 children, who has 4 children, who has 4 children. By the time you get down to that great grandchild level, from division alone, that $100 million estate is now worth $330,000 just from division. No taxes, that's nothing. That's just from the division of the estate. And you can do a whole lot more with $100 million than you can with $330,000. So something happens to me, my wealth is still contained underneath that partnership, even though the ownership of the partnership is held by my kids. So that's one way that you do it, controlling the division of the estate underneath a true family bank. And my wife and I, we really do think about our LLC and the structure underneath it as our family bank. Our kids want to start a business. I'm an entrepreneur. Yes, I'm a lawyer, but I also started this firm, and I think of myself as an entrepreneur. I would definitely promote that within my kids, but I'm not going to just hand them a check, right? They're going to first of all prepare a business plan. And I'll help them prepare the business plan. And I don't care if it's a lemonade stand or if it's a, I don't know, used car dealership, whatever it is. Prepare a business plan, and we're going to work through it. And then I'm going to see how or if we want to invest as a family. And then if we do invest as a family, it's not going to be just us giving you money. You're going to take a loan from the family bank, and you're going to have to report back to the family on how that's done. Right? Creating accountability. Again, I don't care if it's a lemonade stand or a used car dealership. You're going to tell us what went right, what went wrong. I know my kids are going to make mistakes in life. We all do, but it'll burn my chaps if all of my kids are making the same mistake. And by my kids coming back and saying, hey, look, this is what we did with the money. This is why it's gone. They're learning from each other in their mistakes. And so all of that kind of contained underneath that family partnership. So in terms of implementation, we've got a good place to do that. We've just got to sort of put in some of those family guidelines.
Thank you for definitely the wealth of knowledge you have in this topic. I mean, we can go forever, but because of the
you can tell I like talking about it.
I think
I told you my wife thinks I'm boring.
But these are important things, and I think all of us who's listening, I would assume they will have somebody, and hopefully Andrew will be one of them, to help them to plan their estate planning. Again, a couple of more questions if you have more time, Andrew. But we didn't talk about the book.
Yeah.
But I guess the book is available, Audible. I have listened to it, and he's talked about division, taxes, protection, everything in the book in detail.
Yeah, Entrusted's on Amazon. It's on Audible. The Audible is me reading it as you experience. So it's having to listen to my horrible voice, but apparently my voice was better than David's. The second book, Riveted, 44 Values That Have Changed the World, that's also on Audible.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Luckily, yeah, it's on Audible. Luckily, one of my clients who's an Emmy award-winning voice actress read it,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's much more pleasant to listen to than mine. But they're all online, and
Sure.
and I encourage everybody to read them. And yeah, any of your listeners are welcome to reach out to me. That email, teamandrew@yorkhowell.com, is always the best one.
Sure. Andrew, so my other question, two more questions. So right now, what is your dream current at this point?
Interesting. So we have some really big hopes for 2023 when it comes to Entrusted. And really, we've launched a new company called Cornology, kind of understanding your core values and the knowledge that brings into the family. And we've now on our beta testing of software that allows financial planning firms to take their clients through this and really get a clear, like 60-page report about what each member of the family's core values are, what the whole family collective as their core values are, a whole report on personality types and any kind of conflict that we identify within the families that prevent them from being able to do this kind of legacy planning. Again, this is all based on a software platform, and we're beta testing it right now. Our old one, we had been through more than beta testing. We had our old process. We had now 2,000 families that have gone through it, our high-end families.
Wow.
But we're going to be taking that all over to Cornology now, and we have 6 firms that are licensing it from us, some pretty big ones actually, because this is a demand. People are demanding this conversation. They don't go into their financial planning firm. They don't go into their lawyer. They don't even go into their accountant any longer and say, how do I make my kids wealthy? They go in and they say, how do I make sure my kids don't become trust fund babies? And so this is a whole process for families to go through, and we're getting really excited about it. We've actually brought in some investing on it and so forth. So it's been a cool process. So my dream is that Cornology gets launched out and it becomes a centerpiece for how families really do their estate planning. I mean this. We want to make an impact on the world. In the next 30 to 40 years, there is going to be a financial transfer, a wealth transfer from one generation to the next of $70 trillion.
Ooh.
I mean, that's a huge amount of money, and most of it is undirected. It's, hey, when you're 18 years old, like we talked about before, here's your share of the estate. We're hopeful that that $70 million stick of dynamite can be directed, and families can create purpose within their planning and create legacies where the money isn't just being wasted and squandered and so forth. So we think this can make a meaningful impact with how families do their planning.
Wow. So that's impressive. And it's spelled as K as a kite, chronology, or how do you?
Cornology, it's with a C,
C, okay.
Corenology.
Regular way. Okay. So it's not live yet, though. It's not live yet.
I don't think we had a beta website up last week. I don't know if it's supposed to be mid-January is when we're shooting for.
Okay.
And we just met with the software developer guys yesterday, and they think they're on track for that.
Yeah,
so
please let me know, because I'm excited to do part of this too. I think I already started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it'll be when it's ready. It's going to be really neat. It's going to be very, very impactful. And one of our large firms that is licensing already our old process, and they just love this new one. They use this as a diagnostic before they will meet with a new client. They make them go through this because now they have a 60-page report about who that family is. Wow. I mean, if you think about that and you're a planner and you're about to meet with a client and you've read 60 pages about what each family member's core values are, you're not going to hit them with, hey, you ought to buy General Electric stock. You're going to say, hey, look, how do we do some investing that might be in more core line with what your family values are, impact investing, all of these various things. So I think that it's going to open a whole corridor for people to have a meaningful conversation with their clients about this. Because most planners, from lawyers to financial advisors or whatever, they don't know how to have this conversation. Clients are asking them about it, but they don't know how to do it. So this is going to be a roadmap that I think people are really going to like.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, and really excited to see that in action. So, believe it or not, we are towards the end of the show, and probably my last question for today for Andrew would be where people can find you, and what is the one thing you want to share today before you leave?
Do your estate planning, right? If you don't do it with me, do it with somebody else. I mean that. I know we laugh about it because but I do mean, even if you go and you get a simple thing done on LegalZoom, like I said, you may have outgrown that, but even if you get something in place, it's better than not doing anything. So please do that. And then how to reach me, like I said before, the best way is through a corny email address called teamandrew@yorkhowell.com. Now that goes to me, it goes to my paralegals, it goes to assistants and so forth, so we don't miss an email. And happy to reach out and talk to anybody here.
Oh, thank you very much for that information, and thank you everyone who's listening. Thank you, Andrew, for your time and giving a lot of this golden nuggets. For sure, we spent about an hour, but I think this is very valuable information for all of us. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, and Happy New Year. And whoever is listening,
Same to you.
whoever is seeing or watching this YouTube, please make sure you click that button, subscribe, and give us 5-star review. That would be helpful. And thank you again for your time, man.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Dream Big and Think Different. We hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to subscribe to our show so you don't miss any gold nuggets. We would appreciate it if you could rate and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, and other platforms. And be sure to stop by SachinMaskeyMD.com to download a free copy of Sachin's book. Until next time.